Oh, are you? Okay. When you're ready to
Hello everyone, my name is James Syke. I'm Assistant Director for the Global Systems Institute, and it gives me tremendous pleasure to welcome you all this afternoon to the forum at the University of Exeter, where we will be hearing from Jordan Rain, Faculty for Future, on the role of citizens' assemblies, participatory democracy, and other routes towards enacting climate justice in a time of climate and ecological breakdown, with a particular focus on higher education. Is that right? That's perfect. Okay, excellent. So I've been asked to introduce Jordan to you all today, in person and online. Where is the camera? See that one there? So I first met Jordan a number of years ago as a small trembling woodland creature on campus of the University of Sussex. So Jordan did his doctoral research at the University of Sussex, and something that he's always very interested and happy to talk about was the psychology of grunting and other vocalizations in sport. So if you have some time, do read his thesis because it is fascinating. He was invited to join the Conversation, which is an academic kind of news site. How do we describe the Conversation now? What do we call it? It's like
The Guardian, but open source, with editors and academics working together.
I like that. Yeah, it's open source Guardian with editors and academics working together. It rapidly became, I would argue, the go-to place for news and insightful analysis that comes directly from academics. So Jordan was one of the editors there. He worked there for a number of years. And I think that's actually when I first met you online, or virtually at least, must have been through that. But then Jordan and I ended up working together because Jordan founded, and I helped found, an organisation called Faculty for Future. And I guess we'll be talking a little bit about Faculty for Future as it is today. And we had some quite wild ideas and ambitions, and they continue to live, if not on the material plane, and spiritually. And Jordan will be talking about some of those things today. And one of those very discrete material things is this idea of running citizen assemblies in universities, because I would argue, and I think many people who are here today would agree, that universities need to do much more in order to begin to effectively respond to what is recognised as a crisis. So I think Jordan is going to be speaking for 45 minutes or so, generally. And then there will be about 15 to 20 minutes for Q&A, but also we have the opportunity to hang out a little bit more in the area outside. So we'll have plenty of time to put our questions and further discuss what Jordan is going to raise in terms of issues and topics. So without further ado, if we could all welcome Jordan to the University of Exeter. Jordan Rain.
Hi everyone, it's nice to be back. I grew up just on the border between East Devon and Dorset, so I spent many an afternoon in Princess Hay, or on the streets of Cathedral Green, etc., etc., even a night in Timepiece. Is Timepiece still a thing? Yeah. Great, I'm glad. Well, I'm actually not, but I am going to embody a little bit of system change myself by not talking at you for 45 minutes. We're going to make this as participatory as possible. There's some things that I want to say about participatory democracy, citizens' assemblies, people's assemblies, but I want to start with a question for you folks to discuss amongst yourselves. Just divide yourselves however you like initially. And that is, what would Exeter University look like if its staff, students, and local communities were collectively making decisions together about how it was run? What would be different? So a couple of minutes. Talk amongst yourselves, and then I'd love to hear what some thoughts are. Okay, folks, if you can finish your conversations in the next 10-15 seconds, please. Okay, all right, nice one, everyone. Okay, so yeah, give one more minute. Okay, all right, if we can finish up. All right, everyone, settle down. All is in the session. All right, who wants to contribute? And by the way, just I forgot to mention, folks watching online, I'm going to put you into breakout groups when we go into discussion points. Do please join and get involved in the conversation. I noticed that some of you were in rooms on your own, so I'm going to make less breakout groups, and you might end up being in sort of groups where there's quite a few of you, but at least hopefully none of you will be on your own. I'm not entirely sure how easy it's going to be to bring people into the room online with voice, but please raise your ideas in the chat. Folks in the room, who wants to contribute about the discussion that was had on their table? Yep.
Okay, so we think that there will be more student engagement in like field elections and just democracy in general. Oh, thank you. So we think that there'll be more engagement in democracy and stuff at unis. We think that the way that uni spends money would be different. We think that it would be run a bit less like a business. We think that the curriculum might be radically different. And we think, what was over here? More responsive senior management. Is that a good summary of the table? Okay.
Great, nice one. Who else wants to chime in? Be great to hear somebody from every table. Don't be shy.
Hello, this is my third day at Exeter University, so this was a little bit of a strange question to think about. But I can talk a little bit about my previous university, which is the University of Edinburgh. And we were talking a little bit about Shell and fossil fuels, and maybe what a democracy might look like in terms of Exeter University divesting from fossil fuels, and actually did quite a lot of work at Edinburgh with the Student Guild up there in terms of trying to encourage the university to move away from investing in fossil fuels, and in the end they haven't. And so I guess maybe that was a positive story in terms of student democracy, in terms of building towards at least maybe a net zero university. So yeah, but sorry, I can't comment on Exeter University just now.
Amazing, thank you. And what university was that? Sorry,
Edinburgh.
Nice, great to hear. Okay, one or two more people want to contribute.
Hi, thanks. We talked a lot about the input of different groups. So community might be more focused on student accommodation in Exeter and the kind of incessant growth of student numbers and what that means. Students might be more concerned about spaces on campus and facilities that they want. So we have the example of the Sober kitchen being totally small to the good queue. So if it was more democratic in terms of giving students what they wanted, there might be more eating spaces and study space. And yeah, we were talking about numbers being an issue, overcrowding.
Right, thank you. One more person.
Yes, here. Oh no, I thought you wanted. No, okay, I'll do it. Great. We talked about how decision making happens in the university. It seemed a little bit opaque. It's not clear how staff and students contribute to decision making, and certainly there does seem to be a very small number of the university community who actually make those kind of strategic decisions. There was a great deal of folks for insight about that.
Great. Okay. All right. So the proposition that I want to put to everybody today for us to discuss is that citizen assemblies, people's assemblies, all these kinds of mini publics are a great way to start moving our universities towards these kinds of realities that everybody has been discussing today. And there's no one size fits all. When we talk about citizen assemblies, people's assemblies, what we're essentially referring to is this broad category of mini publics, right? The creation of little pockets of representative groups that represent the demography of an institution, of a country, of a region at large, that all revolve around the idea of bringing people together to deliberate, to be in dialogue with each other, to express their views, to resolve their differences, and to come to shared paths forward. Actually, just to get a quick read of the room, how many people haven't heard of people's assemblies, citizen assemblies before? Okay, that's great. So in that case, what I will do is talk a little bit about the trajectory of citizens' assemblies and people's assemblies over the course of the last, well, I guess you can talk about it on a millennial scale. It's not on a new idea. Originated in ancient Athens. Back then, what it meant to be a citizen was much more restrictive, but they're certainly not new ideas. But what is happening recently is a revival, so to speak, of citizens' assemblies, people's assemblies. We're experiencing now what has been called a deliberative wave. Thousands of mini publics happening all over the world, and increasing at an exponential rate. I want to start just by talking a little bit about citizens' assemblies, first of all, because I think they're a really useful window into the potential and the obstacles that these mini publics have to actually addressing the systemic crises that we face. Of course, I think the issue that brings us all into shared concern is crises closing in around us on numerous fronts: environmental, social, crises of precarity. And it seems like things are getting worse and not better, and that seems to be why these ideas of allowing people to decide are coming to the fore. But citizens' assemblies are essentially this process of bringing people together when they're done with proper resourcing, at random selection, so people coming in, think of it like jury service, but for making policy. But the group of people in that room are selected by an algorithm to be demographically representative, say, for example, if it were the UK running it, of the entire country. But there's some interesting insights from recent citizens' assemblies that highlight some of the issues with these top-down government-sanctioned citizens' assemblies. So there's been 2 climate assemblies that have been held recently, one in the UK and one in France. They're not the only ones, but I'm going to pick these out because they provide some interesting insights. So in the UK, we had Extinction Rebellion come onto the scene and call for a citizens' assembly, and actually the government obliged quite quickly, and it ran an assembly, but there were a few key issues with that. One was that the scope was incredibly limited. The question was, how should the UK reach net zero by 2050? So they were already being kept into a certain box that limited the capacity for system change. And the second thing is that there was very little engagement from the government to actually make the public aware of this assembly. So name recognition of this assembly is quite low. How many people knew that this assembly happened in the UK? There's quite a lot of engaged people here, and not everybody knew. So imagine what it's like for the general population. Now, this is really, really important, because for assemblies to have an impact, they have to have legitimacy. And for them to have legitimacy, if you're looking at making decisions at a nationwide level, then the public have to know about it, and the public have to really buy into what is happening. So that was not the case in the UK. The UK did not invest in raising awareness of this assembly, of trying to involve the public outside of the 100 people that we're discussing, and the result was that it really didn't have very much weight. Now, this contrasts to an assembly, a national assembly, similar assembly that was run in France. The question, much broader. It asked participants to consider how to reduce emissions in the spirit of social justice. And the other interesting thing about this assembly was that the name recognition was super high. So most of the nation knew that this assembly was happening, and it had some amazing consequences. There was a climate denier that turned up on the first day thinking that they were going to go home, and came at the end of that process really having completely transformed their perspective. The group came up with a raft of really progressive recommendations to reduce emissions in the spirit of social justice. They actually also said that they would have been even more radical, but they didn't think that the public were ready for these kinds of measures that they were thinking were necessary. So there was a real sense and awareness that they were representing the nation. Now, the interesting thing about the French Assembly, some of you may have heard, Emmanuel Macron said beforehand that there would be no filter, that he would implement the recommendations in full. Anyone know what the reality was? Guess what percentage? Just shout out, what percentage were actually implemented? It's better than zero, thankfully. A bit higher? 10%. So 90% of the Assembly's recommendations were rejected. A big reason for that is that various industries embarked in an all-out lobbying offensive to either get rid of measures or water them down. There was one particular example. I think one of the recommendations that they put forward was a frequent flyers levy, and the air lobbying industry got right in there, and that's now nowhere to be seen. So there's an issue here, a pattern emerging that although there's, I believe, great potential for these assemblies, that when they are commissioned top down by states who are part of the set of systems that are really part of the problem, and of course everyone's got different ideas about what that is, but there are limitations to the degree to which these actors can really challenge the systems that are currently sending us to a not very good place. There's one more example I want to share, and that's the Global Assembly. Has anyone heard of the Global Assembly here? Run by a non-state actor, by ISWE Foundation. They put together an incredible algorithm to select people at random from all across the world, dividing the world into quadrants, and then getting a person in that quadrant to go to a place at random in that square, literally go around, knock on doors and say, do you want to be a part of it? The result, 11 people were white in this assembly. Everybody came together, translators, run on a shoestring, but done incredibly well. If you're interested in some of the stories, just type in Global Assembly onto YouTube. There are some stories from folks all across the world participating. But of course, issue being no power. That said, they are now working with the UN to figure out where this can go. So watch that space. But I guess the central point that I really want to make here is that it's clear no matter how we proceed into the future, we really need to be better understanding how power works in order to address the crisis that we face. Because if we have a shallow understanding, then we wind up with democratic interventions that don't address the systemic aspects of the crisis that we face. And so one thing that I want to talk about today is a kind of a new wave of experimentation that's happening in the field of mini-publics, and I guess, well, it depends. Not all aspects of this are new. I'm talking about people's assemblies. People's assemblies have been used for decades as well. They're much more self-selecting a grassroots form of deliberative democracy. It's not selecting people by random lottery. It's we're running this thing, come along. But there are some interesting developments that are happening in the last few decades that I want to talk about. So the potential for these spaces, first of all, is to really bring together a bottom-up vision of how we can address XYZ issue that the Assembly wants to discuss, and that's important because so much of the issues that we face, the actions that we take depend on how we frame the issues themselves. And Laurie can talk at great length about the limited framings that so many of our incumbent institutions are seeing crises from, and the result being that we don't address the roots of the problems. We just stick plasters on the symptoms. Are really great spaces in general for bringing people together in a way where no voice dominates. It brings out the best in people who would normally not take the mic. What I love about these spaces is that there is a kind of a habit in these spaces for the most important and resonant and emotionally impactful issues to come to the fore. There's an example that one of my great friends, Kelsey Fry, who's run 500 assemblies and more over the past couple of decades, speaks about an assembly, I think it was in Devon, where it was a community assembly just talking about issues that were relevant and important to folks in the community there. And somebody came up and said, oh, dog walkers keep leaving poo on the beach, and I really want to sort that out. And went on a little bit like that, and then there was a 17-year-old who took the mic and said, I'm terrified. I really doesn't feel comfortable being up here, but I felt that I needed to say this, which is that I'm 17 years old and 5 of my friends have already committed suicide, and that room instantly went silent. And then somebody else came up and shared a very similar experience, and what came out of that was a whole raft of community-driven initiatives to deal with that issue in the community, because people really felt the importance of that issue. They felt the emotion, they felt how it was affecting their community, and everybody agreed that something needed to be done. And what's great about these spaces is that because they're bottom up, they have the potential to generate action as opposed to just generating recommendations for others, which is, in a nutshell, where the UK and the French Citizens Assembly ended up falling a bit flat, because they gave the power to people to not decide, but to recommend, and then it went back into the same machinery that has shown time and time again that it's not really doing as good a job as it could and should be doing to address the crises that we face. So there is something powerful in these assemblies, in the invisible power that they contain. I want to paint a vision today of a world in which there are loads and loads and loads and loads and loads of people's assemblies happening, where they are not just making recommendations to others, but bringing the power of people in that room together to figure out what can they do themselves to take action on the things that are important to them. And that doesn't just mean, oh, well, we've got to suddenly take responsibility for everything. It means, how can we organize ourselves to more effectively convince or pressure or engage with power holders to take the kind of actions that people want? Because we're seeing time and time again that people are ahead of politicians on the issues that matter. And there's something I think of great potential in these bottom-up assemblies to really shift the experience of what it means to be a human being in today's society. Right now we live in these consumer societies where we are told that the way that we contribute to climate crisis is to turn our heating down a little bit, or buy less of this, or buy a slightly more sustainable that. And really there's huge power latent within us all to come together and drive the action that we want to see. And if the more and more and more these things happen, then it really shifts general perceptions, ideas about to what degree people should be involved in decision making, and how. So even if these assemblies don't necessarily immediately always result in action, because we're talking about a lot of concentrated wealth and power, essentially, that is at the heart of the predicament that we're in, and that's not easy to figure out how to move from where we are to where we need to get. But what is really important is the cultural and psychological, ideological context in which these decisions are made. And if people are more used to being citizens and participating, then we have a much better landscape from which to then go forth and figure out how do we resolve the issues that face us. So I think that's enough of me yabbering on about power and citizens' assemblies, people's assemblies. I want to move on to maybe some experiences of participating in citizens' assemblies and people's assemblies that people have had. The reason I want to do that is because there's something special about being in these environments. There's one thing talking about them, but when you really experience the atmosphere of coming together and speaking with people that you wouldn't normally speak with on a level playing field, it's a special thing to behold. And so I want to try and draw out some examples of that. Before I do, I just wonder if anybody in the spirit of deliberative democracy has anything that they want to add about what they feel people's assemblies, citizens' assemblies can bring to the current predicament that we're in.
In criticism, particularly in some time side, finding in literature,
that there's too much assumptions when you get consensus, and that actually you shouldn't always expect consensus, and that that's not always a bad thing, and that you might learn to understand that people do have different views from you. Maybe you reconcile differences. I think that's a hard one, given a lot of the thrust is for change. I think there's a lot to be said for that view, which is cultural, as cultural significance, not getting simple political solutions.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, one thing that we all need to be incredibly aware of is that a lot of, while citizens' assemblies, people's assemblies are popular actually on the left and the right, they're popular with populists, they hold a lot of potential to kind of really lean into the polarization that exists within society and provide spaces that depolarize. There is also a risk that because more and more assemblies are coming from social movements, if they're handled poorly, then they basically become seen as ways of trying to put forward an agenda. And if assemblies become this, then they lose all of their power. What you touched on there, I think, is really important, that we do disagree in society. You know, society is full of disagreements, and democracy is just about finding a way to disagree agreeably, essentially. And I think what we've arrived at is a society through, you know, decades of identity politics and really divisive, competitive election campaigns, and quite frankly, just, you know, the worsening of living conditions for people into a really polarized state, and of course, social media algorithms they literally make money from dividing us. And so people are not disagreeing agreeably. They're disagreeing disagreeably at the moment. And you're right, consensus is not the aim of citizens' assemblies or people's assemblies. The aim is to be able to have everybody's voice heard, have a conversation, and find a through line, and arrive at a solution that's not going to please everybody, but at least everyone feels like they've been involved in the decision. There's a couple of examples that I can think of here that are really interesting to illuminate that point. One is the political situation that's going on in the Netherlands at the moment, which I don't know too much about, but I know there's basically been this kind of, is it that they've banned pesticides that contain nitrogen? Does anybody know? Yeah, is that what it is? And now there's been this massive political movement that's arisen out of outrage among the farming community in the Netherlands, and I think they've even become the largest political party or something like that. And the political system's in a little bit of turmoil right now. Now, can you imagine if there had been a citizens' assembly to determine what policy should be on that front? Do you think the same outcome would have happened? I don't believe so. And the reason is because everybody would have got together and been involved in a conversation. And it may be that the same outcome might have happened in terms of the policy, but the farming community would have at least felt heard and involved in the decision. And of course, I imagine that the policy would have been far less punitive to farmers than it was. The flip side of that is to look at a citizens' assembly that happened in Ireland on the issue of abortion, where that incredibly contentious issue was discussed by the representative sample of the demography of that country, and the result was the decision to legalize abortion, and people there the people in that space were not going out all singing from the same hymn sheet, but they at least said, although I don't agree with the decision, I can understand why it's been made, and I recognise that this is the decision that is best for the country overall. So another hand. Oh, online. Are citizens' assemblies just too cumbersome to achieve the change we need in the limited time we have? Well, it depends who you ask. I believe. Well, there's a deeper gripe that I have with the narrative around we don't have time. I think, I spoke before about this kind of, addressing the crisis that we face with plasters rather than getting to the roots. I think this narrative of we don't have time, time is running out, is actually obstructing the much deeper interventions that we need into the fabric of our democracy, so that we can actually start to really unpick the roots of the crises that we face, which I think goes down to, a deep cultural interweaving from the colonial age and even before of prosperity and eternal growth through exploitation and extraction. That's what I personally believe, right? I'm one person. But the point being made here is that I think that if we are to address the crises that we face, that we need to focus on the processes, the ways in which decisions are made, and then the outcomes will flow from that. And it may be, that we lose a bunch of time in, the first few years, but what we find is that once we've got that infrastructure in place, then we are arriving at decisions that are much, much, much better and actually allow for the exponential acceleration of action later down the line. I suppose the other thing to say is that to focus on instituting these processes does not mean that we suddenly have to just stop everything else, right, and put down our tools. What can and in fact is happening is that we're progressing and at the same time a recognition that it should be ordinary people that are making policy at local, institutional, regional, national, global levels is kind of almost in a way the third great democratic struggle. First of all, to have universal suffrage. Second in the 60s with the equal rights movement, civil rights movement, and now it feels like we're approaching this threshold quite naturally in a way where people are realizing that the current political architecture that we have in place is as much part of the problem as it is a part of the solution. So I think it's probably an inevitability. I hope it's an inevitability. Yeah. Any more? I don't know why I'm looking behind me.
Tim's got his hand up, so I think Tim just unmute himself.
Oh, I didn't know that was possible. Great. Hi, Tim.
Hey, Jordan. Yes, I love the discussion. I just wanted to inject a thought about participatory budgeting, basically. I mean, I've been enjoying learning about what's happened historically in Porto Alegre in Brazil and many other places now where participatory budgeting, so deliberative participatory democracy to give out a fraction of your taxes effectively if you live in a city on public works or things for the public good, has been really powerful and had many benefits. Now, you could think about that in a narrow sense. Well, that could have great benefits at city scales, just on investing for citywide action on climate. Well, I'm actually kind of curious what if the movement isn't pushing harder for, say, participatory budgeting at a national scale for some fraction of the budget of action on climate, essentially, in the ecological crisis. So these participatory budget processes, as you'll know, they don't get control of the whole budget, obviously, and it's often democratically debated what fraction of budget they would have. But personally, as a citizen, I'd be a much happier citizen if I could have some say over some fraction of my tax expenditure, in particular, stop it being spent on effectively subsidizing and giving fossil fuel extraction, for example. So I wondered if you could talk a bit about that, because frankly, money is power, as I think we all know. And I think the big failing, the big tragedy in the UK Climate Assembly was that there was never a thought through process as to how the 6 special committees that commissioned it would actually do anything with what the Assembly recommended in terms of bringing it into, well, spending of money or policy or regulation. So yeah, there we go. Enough for me.
Yeah, I think participatory budgeting is a fantastic example of participatory democracy in action. I think it would be great, given that we're in a university setting as well, to imagine, you spoke about this at a national level, and the closer that we can move to that, the better. And yeah, I can only imagine that I mean, I think there might be a little bit of chaos ensuing as people argue about how much of our defence budget, should be. But that would be certainly an interesting thing to work through as a community of citizens. How we get there, I don't have the answer to that. But what I think I can speak to and maybe segue to, given that we're in a university setting, is thinking about participatory budgeting at the university level. You know, how would I asked the question at the start, how would our university look like if it were staff, local communities, and students deciding? Well, that would be one great way of actually, really a university putting their money where their mouth is, to say, well, our budget is going to be decided by the core of the university. I'm sure we probably wouldn't be seeing the level of cuts that we are to the arts departments, for example, all across the country. And I think what it would also do, I think one interesting thing that I want to speak to as well is that, you have these assemblies are very much locally grounded, right? And so in a way, I'm here to talk about an assembly that's going to be happening at Exeter University, which is part of a wider network of assemblies that Faculty for a Future is helping to support. I always feel a little bit reluctant or reticent in a way, or hesitant to talk about, investing time and energy in a local assembly when the conditions that lots of people are experiencing in academia are frankly shit right now. Students experiencing constant strikes, incredibly expensive accommodation, and staff being increasingly on casualized work contracts, constantly working. James, I've had a conversation with you about, being at, 150% of your allocated workload, the pension dispute, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And a lot of the reason that many of these things are happening, it's systemic. It's got nothing to do with the local environment. I think the local, universities can be much more attentive to the needs of staff and students at a local level, but there are also deep systemic issues. And I think there's real potential for local assemblies. And for example, if you imagine a participatory budgeting exercise were to happen at a local university, it would say, well, we want the money to be spent on whatever. And then the people in charge of actually making that happen would probably come back and say, or in that assembly say, well, we can't do that because X, Y, Z. And it would speak to these blockers that happen outside of the local level. But if there were lots and lots and lots of assemblies having that same conversation all across the country at the same time, these insights can come together, and you can have representatives from assemblies at lots of different local assemblies then coming together and having a conversation about what systemically needs to change. And obviously that takes time to develop, but the consequence of that is a set of either recommendations or ideas about how to make what emerges as a priority happen, that have huge legitimacy and have far more legitimacy than mandates that are coming from elsewhere. So I think it might be a good time, given that we are rapidly approaching the end, to segue a little bit to some stuff that's going on in the local area with people's assemblies, and pivot from there to including folks actually in the trajectory of that going forward. So how many of you haven't ever attended a people's assembly before? Okay, well, there is a great opportunity for folks to attend one next week. And Lewis, do you want to just share a little bit about what's happening next week, or would you prefer not to?
Yeah, I do, yeah. So I'm Lewis. I'm Lewis Freeman. I'm helping, along with others in this room, to organise a community assembly, which is happening at the community centre next Wednesday on the 24th. So yeah, I mean, similar to what you described, we've tried to get as representative a group to attend the assembly as possible. So we're representing the demographic of Exeter if we can.
And yeah, one of the reasons I'm here really is to try and link up these assemblies. So if we can link up the assembly that's happening in the wider community with the one that's going to be happening at the university, and then, you know, ping back, because we'll probably do another community assembly later on in the year. So that would be good, a good kind of outcome.
And what's the assembly on?
Well, first part of the assembly is what's important to you. Yeah, basically the group will decide what the question is. So what are the three most important things for you that you want to change? And then we'll go from there to identifying, well, what do we want to change about that, what's within our control. Definitely, as you said, want to be action focused rather than having recommendations for local government. So what can we actually do? And also the other thing just to say is that those top three, let's say, things which are most important to the people of Exeter will then be fed into a UK-wide National Assembly, which is taking place later this year, and there'll be similar assemblies going on all across the UK, which will also feed in to that UK-wide assembly.
Nice one, thanks, Lewis. And yeah, so that's happening as part of a movement called Humanity Project, which is super exciting because it's helping folks all across the country to organise bottom-up people's assemblies in their local communities. But crucially, these are happening as part of a connected network. And so the National Assembly that Lewis mentioned is one that's going to pull in lots of input and insight from these local assemblies. So we're starting already to see experimentation emerge where you have local assemblies being networked to have more regional, national, systemic impacts, which I think is super exciting. There are other developments happening at the same time as well. A foundation that's developing digital infrastructure to be able to much more effectively link up local assemblies and be able to see what each other are doing. So we're starting to see this kind of new democratic infrastructure emerging. We're super tight on time. Is it very quick?
Regarding, it's sort of a wider question as well about this kind of citizens assembly, is how do you ensure that the sample in that assembly is representative of the whole range of views? Because if it's opt-in like this, does it not run a slight risk of sort of becoming an echo chamber with people like us who are really passionate about the climate? How do we make sure that these sorts of citizens assemblies capture the whole strip of opinion regarding the climate crisis?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's certainly a tricky one to do well. But I think the trick is in making sure that you, as an organizer, are really in contact with what is going to resonate with the community as a whole. If your question is good, then you've already done half of the work, rather than if you ask a question that kind of just basically reveals what you want already. The second thing then is to really invest time and energy into outreach and making sure that you're reaching into places that cover, you know, every part of the area that you're trying to engage with. And you know, if it comes to it as well, knocking on doors and trying to really find out what matters to people. You know, the best community organizing is community organizing that asks what matters to people, not what do I want to see happen. But yeah, it requires time and energy essentially. I suppose there's one alongside this community assembly, there's an opportunity if you want to really engage with that challenge of how do we do this in an actual real life context right here at the university. So following on and connected to the community assembly that Lewis has mentioned, there is an assembly on Streatham campus planned for March. And to finish off, just want to do a little bit of an exercise to actually really involve you folks in what you feel matters to you about what you'd like to see either this next assembly or an assembly later down the line cover. But first of all, I just want to see if, Rafi, is there anything that you wanted to share about the context for that assembly? What's been happening?
Yeah, just try to say a couple of quick things. Can you hear me? It's muted, okay, yeah, just following on, we want you to sign up for the assembly next Wednesday. We'd love to have you, and if you're super interested in assemblies, as I imagine you all are by this point, we need your help as well to run it. So if you're excited, basically what's going to happen in the assembly is that we're going to break out into small groups, and we need people to facilitate these groups. Training is provided online, so if you're interested in becoming a facilitator, please come and speak to me or Lewis at the end. And this is just the first of one of many assemblies. And indeed, on the 20th of March, we're going to have an assembly here in Peterborough, so on Streatham. And yeah, we're organising it through the Global Systems Institute. And the goal is really to bring people together to ask that question of what would be different, you know, if we had a say about how this university is run. And yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing what comes out. There's been some talk already about the topic, but we haven't quite narrowed it down. But there has been talk. You guys have already been talking about this earlier today, because already most of the talk's been around, you know, where does the university take funding from? Is it right that it's accepting them from, say, Shell and other companies that are not ethical? But if there are more ideas, let's give them.
Great, thank you. I just want to say this piece, and then hopefully there'll be some time for feeding in at the end.
Just to add something to what you said, I think that's all right. It's very brief.
Have we got time to go until 5 past? Is that? Have we got time to extend over another 5 or?
Yeah, half an hour. Just
I was just going to say, following on from what Rafi said, that even if people don't want to be facilitators, there's a means of signing up for the assembly and not being a facilitator. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there are lots of organising roles to be played in these things, and the more people that get involved, the less of a burden it is for everybody. So I highly encourage anyone who wants to get involved in an organising role, speak to Rafi. If you just want to attend, then are those flyers for that assembly, Rafi?
Yeah, I got flyers.
Sweet. So one final thing I want to mention is that this Exeter assembly is happening as part of the wider initiative from Faculty for a Future, that we're supporting not just Exeter, but another 9 universities across the country to run assemblies at the same time. It's going to be part of a cohort and going to be helping with providing facilitation training, helping with the structuring of that assembly to basically orient towards achievable next steps. So the emphasis is not just on talking, but also on actually being able to do out of the corner of it. And this is the start of a journey where we are trying to actually go on that journey of creating a network of local assemblies across UK campuses that will, in time, as the network matures, talk together collectively about systemic issues and try and actually influence some of the deeper structural issues that all universities across the country are facing, and we're wanting to go beyond the UK as well. I suppose if we've got time to just go a few minutes over, what I would like to do is to just have 2 minutes of conversation in the room now. So Rafi mentioned that the topic for this assembly hasn't been decided, and also that this is not going to be the only assembly, it's going to be the first of an iterative series. So this is an opportunity now for folks in the room and those online that can stay just a couple of minutes longer to have your input on what you would like to see an assembly on at Streatham campus. So I'll put folks into breakout groups. Those who are interested in Faculty for a Future, I've just put a link in the chat as well online, and anyone can come and speak to me if they're not from Exeter but they want to start an assembly. But yeah, 2 minutes together. What would you like to see in assembly on Streatham campus? And we'll come back in a couple of minutes. Yeah, a little bit skin of the teeth stuff. How's it look from that end?
It's great, yeah, that was great, yeah. Well, it's interesting, because yeah, everybody's heard of assemblies.
Yeah.
Super.
Which is good though, because hopefully it's easier once it gets involved. Do you feel like it's been enough time for people to kind of get involved and chat? So I don't know how, but I don't feel like I spoke for too long. Sort of by the time I finished.
Yeah, but it always becomes, it's just, there's like a lot of discussion. That's
Good, no, it's great. How do you want to, oh, is this going to be recorded, so I say this week?
Yeah. Yeah, I took some notes. Yeah, actually, I brought my laptop.
Well, I've got my laptop here if you want to.
Oh, it's okay. I wrote this down. Yeah, I mean, like, but I can also watch it. So we watched it. Because when everybody said that was really interesting. In the beginning, when you asked like what was really, everyone said that. I was like, I wish I was typing with that, but I might just go to recording. Yeah, no, this is great because
Real introductions.
Yeah, giving people a sense of what this is. So, sorry. No, yeah, the more people like, don't be afraid to read this. It's great to have some help. Maybe we can end. If you want to see please, you know, maybe you can just go and say one of the words. Yeah, I would definitely go by the doors. All right, cool. All right, 10 seconds, everybody. Okay, let's wrap it up. Create some time to hear what folks have to say. If we can, yeah, just have at least one representative from each room. Maybe if you feel like you're able to hold, this is deliberative democracy practice and action, right? Typically you'll have a note taker who will come and respond what the input of the entire table was. So if we can try and get into that spirit, as we have been doing, who would like to report back what their table had to say?
Yeah, so I think the main thing that we talked about was about how decisions are made within the university, and it comes back to the question of how paid for, clear decision-making structures are, and we feel like that, there's not one model for the way the universities do things. All the universities will clearly do things differently, but I think be informative to have a discussion about that and alternative ways of going about that. And you know, whether things are watered that down or.
So a decision-making process about a decision-making process. Love it.
Willing to go with that.
Great, nice one. Okay, who wants to go next?
We just talked about ensuring that people can, like, there's a broad enough topic that people can guide the discussion. And it looks like, and it would look at most aspects of the university and kind of like what you said at the very beginning, like what would something like what would an ideal university look like to you? Because that can cover sustainability and climate change, but it can also cover various other issues that people might be interested in, and so you will probably get better engagement that way as well, because I think, yeah, an important point is also ensuring that you have a very big and broad part of the student body participating.
Fantastic. Yeah, great points. Okay, who wants to go next?
Push the slide up.
I think we should talk about how our microphones work. Yeah, no, we talked about Shell, because not only like that partnership, but kind of what it represents in terms of like how the university makes decisions, how it reflects like marketization with education, and just kind of like the hypocrisy and how the university has that power and the agency to use marketing, the strategy, the buzzwords, but at the same time make deals with like one of the biggest climate criminals. So yeah, we spoke mainly about Shell.
And do you want to speak a little bit about the experience that Falmouth has had having those same conversations and what's come out of that?
Yeah, so about like this time last year when the Shout Out campaign kind of was just starting, I went down to the Falmouth People's Assembly, which was on Shell. It was really well attended by people at the university and at the local community. And yeah, mainly what came out of that was just some really good like discussions about like what the university is for, and how we kind of raise this issue like more broadly in like the university community. And I think in terms of like the campaign, that People's Assembly was like a really good way to make kind of having input on the issue like more accessible to people, as well as like just doing like the protesting and everything. So yeah, it'd be really good to kind of replicate that on this campus as well. And at the Student Union, we just had a really great survey, which has showed like over 75% of students, and it was about 350 people answered it, said like students should have a say in who the university partners with. So I think like that combined with people's assemblies and different ways to like get feedback and get input from people, it's great.
Great, sounds great. Who wants to go next?
Yeah, thanks. I just want to make a point on that. It's like, where do you draw the line? Because this building is paid for by government. If we can't be UK government extracts all the other tax. So it's like, you know, you want to shell out and I completely agree. But where do you draw the line about who we partner with and who we don't partner with? Because I don't know, Shell's got an easy brand to kind of take care of bad guys, but there's a lot more bad guys out there which I'm happy to work with. Open question to everyone.
So, well, this is a great example of deliberative democracy happening in motion. What I would suggest is that we park that conversation for outside when we're all chatting, because I think we could go on forever. I just want to give everybody a chance to report back what they wanted an assembly at Streatham campus to cover, and I'm just conscious we haven't heard from every single table yet. So somebody from this table, this table, this table. But do please carry on that conversation. I think it's a super important one to have.
Yeah, I think most people on our table agree there should be something around ethical partnerships and fossil fuel funding. And other ideas were about making the university a plant-based space, and also having a citizen assembly, I think it was similar to one from over here, which was how do citizen assemblies feed into the governance of the university? And also how do staff and students feed into the curriculum?
Great, thank you. Some common themes emerging. Okay, we've got 2 tables that still haven't fed in.
No, after you.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's the same with Shell. I'm actually, you can hear me. There we go. Okay. So it's exactly the same, usually Shell as well. But just in terms of analyzing this idea of like integrity in the sense of the eyes of people, because as a species and basically physiologically this for the last 15,000 years. So had this notion of like townsfolk and like pattern recognition, whether it's like heads of family or communities, you can see that you've got institutions like the GSI, etc., being like really well connected and really like well leading in terms of research, climate change. And then to have an institution that accepts that sort of money, you have people that have great sensitivities to this aspect. So it's looking at that idea of integrity in terms of like perhaps institutional role, whether the question of money that what the financing is, but in terms of it in the eyes of the community that looks up at this hill. Yeah.
Great. Okay. One more table.
Shall I do it? Come on now. Thank you. Thank you.
It's gone off again.
About the partnerships, so I think there's great utility in us talking about partnerships because it's not just the partnerships, the decision making around the partnerships. One of the concerns people have got about that particular company was how those decisions were made, and I would argue they weren't particularly transparent, right? But whether it's Shell, whether it's JP Morgan, whether it's Barclays, the university's got long-standing relationships with companies and institutions and organisations that we as a community might want to reflect on, and we might want to strengthen some of them, and we might want to walk away from others. The other thing, another good example of a utility or power of a citizen assembly could be something through the University Net Zero Plan. So in 2019, we didn't talk about this at all, actually. So in 2019, the university declared a climate and ecological emergency. It set a very ambitious target of 2050, and then it increased that ambition to 2030. The university is currently beginning to roll back that. The reason it's rolling back is because it's realised you can't offset your way to 2030 net zero. That shouldn't be something which a relatively small people in the university get to decide. That should be something that the university community decide, because it really is about what the mission, the purpose of the university, and how it does operations. I think that'll be another great example for a community assembly.
Great, thank you for being an excellent note taker.
Thank you.
Okay, so
have you? Sorry.
That I mean,
a song.
I think I've seen. Yeah. All right, so I'm conscious that we're at 12 past, but thank you everybody for contributing to that. I think it's really useful to hear what the room is feeling. What I would say is, particularly it looks like that issue of integrity partnerships is resonating quite widely across the room. It seems like, what role should deliberative democracy play in the university itself was cropping up again, which I think is super fascinating. I hadn't come across that before, but I think it's a great idea. What I would say is that, say for example, particularly with the ethical partnerships thing, I think it's really important to have a team on there who are representing slightly different views on that. So, my invitation to you would be get involved in the organising team and share that burden and figure out how you can have a conversation that has really widespread legitimacy, because that would be my final parting thought here, is that whatever assembly happens, the energy really needs to go into making sure that it is not just an echo chamber, that people from across the university and outside the university, not just academic staff and students, but also non-academic staff of different departments, etc., are part of that space. How is a more is a longer question with a longer answer. But yeah, Rafi is going to be over there. What are we doing now? Are we sort of milling around somewhere?
yeah, enjoy the coffee and see a great chat.
So let's continue those conversations, and anybody who is up for just, even just devoting, a day a month or something like that, or a couple of hours a week, to help make this assembly a success, then get in touch with Rafi. It would be great to have a big team. The more of you there are, the less the burden is for everybody, the more that you can make your voices heard. And ultimately, if this is a success, it's going to keep building and it's going to keep building, and it's going to become impossible to ignore. So if you are annoyed about anything or want to change anything that's happening at university, this is an opportunity to walk on a bottom-up, community-led path to transforming it. Thank you very much for having me, guys.